They sent the unwanted daughter. The mountain man saw a treasure they never did. Before we begin, comment your country so I know where the story is reaching. By the time the sun slid over the low hills of Dry Willow, the verdict on Ruth Alder had already been spoken 100 quiet times. She was the plain one, the serious one, the daughter people's eyes slipped past at church and in town. In a house where beauty was treated like currency, Ruth had none to spend. At least, that's what her family liked to say. Her father, Jonas Alder, ran the biggest store for 3 counties. Her mother, Elise, had once been praised as the prettiest girl on the prairie. Their 2 younger daughters, Lila and May, turned heads wherever they went, with ribbons in their hair and laughter that always seemed just a bit too loud. Ruth stayed in the background, stocking shelves, balancing ledgers, tending to their frail grandmother in the back bedroom, doing everything that needed to be done, while hearing again and again that she was lucky to belong to such a fine family. On the morning this story truly shifts, a rider came from the north with dust on his shoulders and an envelope in his hand. He stopped at the store, nodded once, and passed the letter to Jonas. The seal on it carried a name every rancher and trader in the territory knew. Micah Thorne, the mountain man of Iron Ridge. He was half legend by then, sitting alone on more land than most towns, with herds spread along the foothills and enough stored grain to feed 3 valleys through winter. Men respected him. Some feared him. Women whispered his name with a mix of curiosity and caution. Jonas Alder slit the envelope with a practiced hand. As his eyes moved over the words, his mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile and not quite a sneer. Elise leaned closer, perfume sharp in the air. Lila and May abandoned their mirror and ribbons, drawn as always to the scent of something happening. Micah Thorne was looking for a wife. Not just any wife. A woman of steady character. A woman who could keep a home in the high country and stand beside him when storms came in hard. And he had written the letter to Jonas Alder by name. Elise's thoughts ran ahead, already dressing Lila in fine fabrics, or picture May walking through a big stone house among the pines. Dowries, connections, wagons arriving with goods, paid for in respect. Which one does he want? May asked, barely able to keep still. Jonas read farther. Then he froze. The letter was plain about it. I ask your leave to be introduced to your eldest daughter, Ruth. For one long second, the room stayed silent. Only the ticking wall clock moved. Then May burst into laughter so sharp it scared the cat off the counter. Ruth? She gasped. He asked for Ruth. Elise pressed a gloved hand to her lips, fighting a smile. He must have his facts wrong. Surely he meant one of the younger girls. Jonas read the line again just to be sure. No mistake. Eldest daughter. Ruth. Lila tilted her head, eyes narrowing with mean amusement. Well, Papa, at least someone wants her, even if it is a man who lives half-wild in the mountains. They laughed because it was easy, because all their lives they had used Ruth's quietness as a mirror to feel bright to themselves. In the back room, Ruth was helping her grandmother sit up to take a spoonful of broth when she heard it, the sharp, cutting kind of laughter that never meant anything good. She paused, set the bowl down, and listened. Through the thin wall, she heard every word. They called her dull, and plain, and unwanted by any man in town. They called Micah Thorne desperate. They said sending Ruth to him would be practical. One less mouth to feed. One less reminder that not all daughters came out pretty and charming. Ruth stood there, hands tightening around the linen towel. It wasn't the first time she had heard such things. But hearing them plan her future like a joke, that was different. Something deep in her chest shifted. Her grandmother watched her with cloudy but knowing eyes. Child, she murmured, don't swallow all of that. Poison belongs outside the heart. Ruth managed a thin, shaky smile. I'm all right, Grandma. She wasn't, but she would be. That evening, Jonas called the family to the long dining table as if he were hosting an important guest. "Ruth," he said, in that heavy tone he used when he wanted to sound generous, "you have received a proposal of sorts." Lila and May were already smirking. Ruth set down her fork and folded her hands in her lap. "From whom?" "Micah Thorne," Jonas replied. "Up in Iron Ridge. He wrote specifically to inquire about you." A flicker moved in Ruth's memory. A winter market years back. A tall stranger who had bought blankets for a widow who couldn't pay. A quiet nod across a row of barrels. Had that been him? "Why me?" she asked, her voice steady. Elise waved a hand. "Does it matter? You're nearly 25. No other offers have come. This is a reasonable opportunity." "Reasonable," May echoed, hiding a grin behind her napkin. Jonas continued, "He is a man of means. Land, livestock, reputation. Whatever his rustic habits may be, you would be cared for." "And how soon would I be expected to leave?" Ruth asked. "In 4 days," Jonas said. "The wagon to Iron Ridge passes then. I've already sent word you'll be coming." There it was. They had decided before even asking her, because they never really asked her anything. Ruth sat very still. Around her, the clink of cutlery resumed. Lila whispered something that made May choke on her bread with laughter. Elise poured more wine with a satisfied sigh. Inside, Ruth weighed her choices with the same quiet precision she used for the store ledgers. Stay. Remain the invisible worker in a house that only valued what could be shown off. Or go. To a stranger in the mountains. To a life unknown. Her grandmother's words lingered. Poison belongs outside the heart. Ruth took a breath that felt like the first one she had drawn in years. "I'll go," she said. The table fell briefly silent. Jonas looked almost surprised she hadn't begged for time. Elise glanced at her as if checking for cracks. Lila murmured, "Imagine her up there," and May snorted into her cup. Ruth did not rise to any of it. She finished her supper, excused herself, and went to the back room, where her grandmother waited under a quilt hand-stitched long before Ruth was born. "You heard." Then Ruth said softly. Her grandmother reached for her hand. Those frail fingers were still warm, still firm. "I heard enough. Are you frightened?" "Yes," Ruth admitted, "but I am more frightened of staying where I am not wanted." Her grandmother's eyes filled, but no tears fell. "There is more to you than they ever cared to see. If that man on the mountain has any sense, he will find it. Go with your head high, Ruth, not as something cast off, as someone choosing a new road." Ruth leaned down and pressed her forehead gently to the old woman's. For the first time, the idea of leaving did not feel like exile. It felt like escape. 4 days later, the wagon rolled out at dawn, wheels crunching over frost-hardened ground. The town slipped by in slow, familiar shapes. The church steeple, the blacksmith, the water trough where she had watched her sisters flirt with passing cowhands. No one waved her off. No one ran after the wagon. Ruth sat upright on the wooden seat beside the driver, one small trunk at her feet and a worn shawl around her shoulders. Her heart ached, but it was not the sharp pain of rejection anymore. It was a sore, stretching ache of change. Out beyond the town, the land opened wide. Fields gave way to rolling hills. Rolling hills rose toward dark green lines of pine. The air grew thinner, cleaner, touched with a faint scent of snow even though it was only early autumn. As the wagon climbed, Ruth thought about the man waiting somewhere ahead. Why had he written for her by name? What had he heard? What had he seen? What did a mountain man, with all his hard-won acres and quiet power, expect from the daughter her own family considered a burden? Those questions rode with her all the way up toward Iron Ridge, settling beside her like silent companions. By the time the peaks finally came into view, Ruth Alder was no longer just the unwanted daughter. She was a woman on whom an entire new life was about to turn. The wagon reached Iron Ridge shortly after midday. The sky had turned a deeper blue, the kind that only appeared at high altitude where the air carried almost no dust. Pines stood tall like guardians on each side of the road, their shadows long and cool across the path. Ruth tightened her shawl as the wagon rounded a bend and revealed a homestead unlike anything she had imagined. The house was large but built with humble lines, made of timber that had darkened under years of wind and snow. Wide fields stretched behind it, bordered by stone fences. A smoke haze, shed, and long barn stood in quiet order, built by hands at work with intention rather than show. Micah Thorne stepped out from the porch as the wagon slowed. He was broader than she remembered. Age and land had shaped him. Square shoulders, steady stance, hair tied at the nape in a simple knot. But his eyes were what held her. Clear, attentive, as if he was seeing her rather than just looking at her. He walked forward without hurry, stopping a respectful distance from a wagon. "Miss Ruth," he said, voice calm, "welcome to Iron Ridge." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She managed a small nod. "Thank you for receiving me." The driver unloaded her trunk. Micah lifted it with ease, but not with the arrogance of a man showing off his strength. He carried it to the porch and rested it by the door. "You must be tired from the climb," he said. "Come inside when you're ready. Food is warm." It was a simple invitation, given without pressure. Ruth stepped down from the wagon, thanked the driver, and followed Micah into the house. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. A stone hearth glowed with steady heat. Shelves lined the walls with books, a few carved pieces, and tools arranged in neat rows. Everything had purpose, but nothing felt cold. Micah poured her tea and sat across from her at a comfortable distance. He waited until her hand stopped shaking before speaking. "I know your journey wasn't an easy one," he said, "and I know you didn't come here with full freedom. I want you to understand something before anything else. You are not expected to marry me, not until you choose it yourself." Ruth blinked, surprised. "My father already gave his word." Micah shook his head. "His word isn't yours." No one had ever separated her voice from her family's choices before. Ruth felt the truth of the statement settle deep inside. "I wrote for you," Micah continued, "because I heard stories, quiet ones, about a woman who ran her family's shop when no one else could, who helped neighbors without asking for anything back, a woman who stood her ground when others found it easier to stay silent." Ruth looked down. "Most people don't see those things." "I do," Micah replied, "and I want to know you for who you are, not who anyone said you were." A long pause settled between them. Not awkward, simply real. Ruth sipped her tea. "Why did you never ask my family for one of the others?" Micah held her gaze with a level steadiness. "Because I wasn't looking for decoration. I'm looking for a partner. Someone who understands work, loyalty, and truth." Ruth swallowed. Words she had never been given suddenly felt heavy in her hands. Micah finally stood. "Let me show you the place. You should see the life you'd be choosing." They stepped outside into the crisp mountain air. The trail behind the house led to a high ridge overlooking fields that glowed in golden afternoon light. Chickens wandered near the coop. Horses grazed in the pasture. Everything breathed quiet stability. "This is where I spend most mornings," Micah said, "checking fence lines, watching the weather move across the valley." Ruth followed his gaze. "It's beautiful." "It's honest," Micah said. "That's what I value most." They walked farther, past a barn where the scent of hay drifted softly. Ruth noticed small details: the trough place to catch runoff, the clean path between pens, the organized tools. Nothing was neglected. Nothing was wasted. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. "With a few hired hands over the years," he said, "but the planning was mine." Ruth studied the layout. Your water flow could be better. Micah turned to her, interest sharpening in his eyes. How so? She pointed toward the slope. If you angled the ditches along the west side, the runoff would feed the lower field. You'd lose less moisture during dry spells. Micah stared at the land, considering her words. You're right. He said it plainly. No pride, no disbelief that she might know something useful. Just acceptance. Ruth didn't realize it, but that moment would replay in Micah's memory for years. They returned to the house as the sun lowered, painting the sky in shades of copper. Micah prepared supper, simple roasted vegetables, beans, and warm bread. Ruth watched him work with ease, noticing how he moved without noise or fuss, as if the house itself trusted him. At the table, he asked about her life. She answered honestly. Her duties, her grandmother, her sisters, the way her father praised everyone except the one who worked the hardest. She kept her voice even, but Micah listened with the seriousness of a man hearing more than just words. You carry more weight than they ever cared to understand, he said. Ruth exhaled slowly. It wasn't all bad, but it wasn't home. Micah nodded. Home should be where you're known, not hidden. Night settled deep around the mountains. Ruth prepared to retire to the small guest room Micah had rented for her. Before she closed the door, Micah spoke softly from the hallway. Ruth, take whatever time you need. A week, a month. You decide when or if you want to stand beside me as my wife. She met his eyes and found no expectation, only patience. Thank you, she whispered. As she lay under the warm quilt, the house silent except for the soft crackle of the hearth down the hall, Ruth felt something unfamiliar move through her. Security, not because she belonged to someone, but because she finally belonged to herself. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the trees. The mountains breathed in slow rhythms. And in that quiet, Ruth Order began to realize that her life was not ending at Iron Ridge. It was only beginning. If you are still here, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach more people like you. Ruth woke to the quiet stillness of a mountain morning, the kind that seemed to hold its breath before the day began. The air was crisp, the sky pale gold, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel rushed. There were no orders shouted from downstairs, no sisters arguing over ribbons, no mother reminding her to stay out of sight. Iron Ridge felt different. It felt steady. It felt like a place where a person could grow roots. Over the next weeks, Ruth learned the rhythm of Micah Thorne's life. Some days they worked side by side, measuring the land or fixing small problems before they grew. Other days, they spent long hours talking, quietly, openly, about the world they each came from. Micah never rushed her. He never demanded answers. He simply made space for the truth to exist. And in that space, Ruth discovered her own voice. One evening, while checking the west fields, she sketched an idea in the dirt with a stick. If you angle the irrigation here, you'll cut the dry patches by half. Micah studied the ground thoughtfully. Show me. She did, explaining each line as though she had been reading the land her whole life. Micah listened, not because he was being polite, but because he genuinely believed she had something worth saying. That's good, he murmured when she finished. Better than good. You see what others miss. The words hit deeper than he likely realized. Back in her old house, noticing things had been a problem. Hey, it was a gift. A turning point came on a cool evening when they walked to the ridge. The valley below stretched in silver-blue shadows, and the pine tops moved like waves in the wind. Ruth, Micah said, voice quiet but steady, I want to ask your thoughts on something important. She braced herself, heart already tightening. I want you as my wife, he said, not because of any arrangement, not because your father said yes, because I've seen who you are. I've seen your strength, your fairness, your mind. I want a life built with you, but only if you want the same. Ruth didn't speak at first. She simply looked at him, the man who had given her more respect in weeks than she'd received in a lifetime, the man who valued her thoughts, her work, her worth. "I do want that," she said softly. "Not because I was sent, because I choose it." Micah's relief was quiet but unmistakable. He nodded once, as if sealing a promise. Within days, the small-town church set a date. Friends from nearby ranches came with warm smiles. Even the wagon driver who had brought Ruth up the mountain arrived with a gift of fresh flour. And though the ceremony was simple, Ruth felt wrapped in a kind of belonging she'd never known. When she walked down the aisle in her blue dress, Micah's expression shifted in a way she would remember all her life. Not shock, not pride, something gentler, like he was seeing a treasure he had always known was there, finally uncovered. They exchanged vows that spoke of partnership, steadiness, and trust. No grand speeches, no polished decorations, just truth. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm until, one late afternoon, a carriage appeared on the ridge road. Her father stepped out. Jonah's older looked smaller than she remembered. His fine coat hung unevenly on his shoulders, and his eyes darted across the property with a mix of envy and hope. Micah came to stand beside her without needing to be asked. "Ruth," Jonas began, removing his hat, "I've come to ask for help." Ruth held still. She did not step forward. She did not offer comfort. Jonas cleared his throat. "Our store is failing. Your mother is overwhelmed. Lila and May, well, they can't manage the books. We're losing everything. I hoped you and your husband might loan us enough to steady things." Ruth didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, not out of cruelty, but clarity. All her life, she had waited for her family to see her. And now, standing on the porch of a home she helped build, she finally understood something important. She didn't need them to. "You sent me away," she said calmly. "Not out of love, but convenience. You never valued what I offered, and now you want the benefit of what you ignored." Jonas swallowed hard. "You're our daughter." Ruth shook her head. "Daughters are cherished. I was useful. That isn't the same." Jonas looked toward Micah for backup. "Will you let her speak to me like this?" Micah answered with no anger, only steady conviction. "She's speaking the truth, and she stands on her own 2 feet. That's something you should have recognized long ago." Jonas tried again, voice cracking. "Ruth, please." "You'll rebuild," she said, "or you won't. But the choices that led you here weren't mine, and the future you want isn't either." Jonas searched her face for softness, but found only resolve, the same resolve they had mistaken for plainness all her life. He climbed back into the carriage and left without another word. When the dust settled on the road, Ruth felt Micah's hand slip into hers. "You did right," he said. "Did I?" she whispered. "You protected yourself," he replied. "That's something you were never allowed to do." Later that night, Ruth sat by the fire with Micah at her side. The warmth filled the room, dancing across the walls they had chosen together. She thought about the life behind her and the life ahead. She wasn't the unwanted daughter anymore. She wasn't the overlooked one. She wasn't the quiet shadow of a family that never saw her. She was Ruth Thorne, partner, builder, a woman whose worth had finally been recognized by the only person who had looked closely enough to see it. Micah touched her hand gently. "You know what they never understood?" She looked at him. "What?" "That what they tried to throw away was the one thing I've been waiting for all my life." Ruth breathed in, slow and full, feeling her heart settle into a place it had longed for without ever expecting to find. Iron Ridge wasn't just where she lived. It was where she finally became herself.